Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name is Sharon and I'm a trainee clinical psychologist, and in today's video we're going to be talking about supervision, and I'm mainly going to be focusing on my tips for assistant psychologists because that's what my previous experience was. But I imagine that most of these tips and pieces of advice can be used in other roles, and I will also definitely be using these things while on training. So we're going to talk about what supervision is, what you're entitled to, what good supervision might look like, what not so good supervision might look like, and also my practical tips for how to make the most out of supervision. But before we hop into the video, please subscribe to my channel if you do like content like this, and give this video a like if you like speaking about more clinical skills and things like that, and I'll try to incorporate that more into my channel. So with all that being said, let's get into it. So what is supervision? Now, in my head when I think of supervision, I think of two different things. So one is kind of the role of the supervisor, and they have responsibility for all of your caseload and all of the responsibilities that you may have. And so say you're working with a client, that person is technically under the responsibility of your supervisor and not necessarily yourself. So supervision might be spent on focusing on the practical things of how many people are on your caseload, what's the plan, whether there are any challenges, whether you are able to support a person in the correct way, and it's also to do with your job performance. And so if there's one client where maybe you're struggling with a little bit, then your supervisor should be there to assess whether it's the most appropriate client for you and give you some advice on how to proceed. So that's one part of it. And then the second part, which is probably more specific to psychology, is this reflective side. And so within the reflective part of supervision, you're meant to bring cases, bring situations, bring research maybe, anything that you can reflect on. And so when we think about reflection, we think about things that you will learn from. And so it's really helpful actually that in supervision, you have someone who is more experienced than you, and you can have these moments of reflection where they can actually, you know, ask you reflective questions to help you pursue different thoughts further, but also to help you understand what you might do next, because they've probably been in this situation before and maybe they know the systems in place to help you maybe escalate something, I don't know, in terms of safeguarding. So it can be really helpful. But another thing within reflection is you can also do things like role play. That's a really great way to learn, and also observation. So while this might not specifically happen like within supervision, like this formal time, it might happen outside of supervision in a more informal setting, which I'm going to get to in a second. Those are kind of the two ways that I see supervision. So there's the more practical side of your caseload and what you're going to do next, and then the reflective side of your professional and personal development and your ability to learn from things that have happened. How much supervision are you entitled to as an assistant psychologist? So as an AP, you're entitled to 2 hours of supervision per week. Now, 1 hour needs to be completely protected, which means it should be in the diary, confidential and protected. So it should always happen and nothing should interrupt it. The other hour is more informal. So this can be through having a conversation in the hallway that might be reflective, or through observing your supervisor, or through them observing you, or through doing joint working as well. That can also count towards the extra hour of informal supervision. Now, as I was looking through these BPS guidelines, I also came across this article, which I'll link down below, and it spoke about the reality versus the guidelines of assistant psychologist roles. And guys, it was shocking. So 27% of the APs who answered this survey said that they received less than 1 hour of supervision per week. Let that sink in for a second, because for me that just sounds ridiculous, because as someone who might have just come from uni, or as someone who hasn't had any formal training, it just seems quite uncontaining and quite unsafe, to be honest, for the clients that we work with. I hope that you guys who are watching this are receiving more than an hour's worth of supervision per week. If you're not, then you need to escalate that as soon as possible. Speak with your supervisor first and then speak to someone more senior if that doesn't work. All of my supervisors have been really supportive, to be honest, and they have really seen the benefits of supervision, and maybe others don't. So when I first came into my role, one of the first things we spoke about was supervision, my expectations of it, when we were going to do it. We had a rolling date every week, so every Thursday at 1 o'clock was my time for formal supervision, and then throughout the week I would have check-ins with my supervisor. Nothing planned in, but we would just bump into each other. Oh, hi, how are things going? Is there any, like, how was that client that you mentioned? Is everything going okay? So that also counts, but just be aware that that 1 hour is meant to be protected. So no interruptions. It can't be moved around all the time. It's meant to be a recurring event that makes you feel contained. So at least I know that every Thursday I definitely have this 1 hour. And that's why I urge you to try and have a set day and a set time for your supervision if possible. So what did my supervision look like as an AP? So my supervision as an AP was quite structured, which I quite liked actually. I felt like it meant that we were always getting to the point, nothing was being left out. And so that was quite helpful for me. So we would always begin with a check-in, so like my own well-being. So that might include, you know, if I'm experiencing any pain this week, because that is something that I do deal with, like chronic pain. And so checking in to see how that is, if it's managed well, how it's impacting my work. We would then move on to any safeguarding concerns, but typically there wouldn't be much there, but it was good for me to know that that would always be a priority during supervision. Then we would speak about annual leave coming up, and if I was, how we were going to navigate my caseload, whether I felt like it was a good time to have a pause in our therapy, and things like that. And also that's good as well, so that I know when my supervisor is going on annual leave, and then if she was, then we would arrange for someone else to supervise me, so it was all in place. And then we would come onto the agenda. So whenever we made the agenda, it typically looked something like this. So I would always have a case review, other projects, a section for reflection, and then any other business. So let's break that down a little bit. So within the case review section, I would come in with the initials, the date of birth, and the age of the client. So that just gave me, firstly, a reminder of who they were, but also it gave my supervisor some context as to, you know, how old they are and what, you know, is their life context at the moment. Having the date of birth is always handy, because if you have to search up a client on the database, then date of birth is a pretty good way to do it, as well as the initials. What I would then do in the case review for each client is update on my previous session, think about any issues that may have come up, and then my plan for future sessions going forward. And that would typically include like a discharge plan or something like that. In this section I would also do some reflection. So when I have that separate reflection section, I don't necessarily save all of my reflections to that point. So I tend to reflect while I'm speaking about my clients as well. And so if we are doing reflections, say if I was anticipating a difficult conversation with the client's family member, my supervisor would ask me if I wanted to role play it, and so we'd do it, and then she would let me know what I could have done better, what things to include. Other things that I would bring to this case review were people's letters or their reports. So all of my letters, all of my written work, to be honest, had to be checked by my supervisor to make sure it was all, you know, at an adequate level. And so I'd bring that to supervision sometimes, or she would look at my writing in between our supervision, and then she'd give me feedback within supervision. And that was pretty much all of the different ways that I use supervision for my like case review. I did that for literally every single client, and by the end of this, I guess the aim is so that my supervisor knows what's going on, because she has responsibility for these clients, not me. So she does need to know what is happening. And so throughout the week, what I would do is note things down that I wanted to bring to supervision. It's really good to keep you motivated in knowing what you're going to do next with your client, and also coming to supervision and being like, I just don't know what to do. I had many supervisions where I was like, I don't know what to do with this client, like I'm feeling so stuck. But that is exactly what supervision is for. And I'm going to get onto this later, but having a good supervisory relationship is so important, because if you can't be truthful with your supervisor, then you're not going to learn. And you should be able to come in and be a bit vulnerable and show your weak spots as well as your strengths, because that's the only way that you're going to learn. Moving on to the other project section. So this section I would typically use for literally any other projects that I had. So maybe the staff support, the protocol that I was writing, if I was doing some research, like a literature review for the service, if I was making a poster, anything like that. And again, my work was pretty much always done collaboratively with my supervisor, not in the way that we'd be working side by side, but she would always check it and make sure that I haven't left anything out, make sure nothing is incorrect, and to just give me general guidance. So everything had to go through her. And so yeah, we'd spend some time discussing it, again, pointers, guidance, and I guess reflections as well if something was quite tricky, or if it was a skill that I definitely need to develop. So actually one skill that I wanted to develop was, you know, my leadership skills, my presentation skills, and kind of, I guess, working in a group setting. And so my supervisor allowed me to co-facilitate a training for the cognitive screen that we used in the dementia service. And so in these other project sections, I guess mainly it was developing those other skills that might be not so much based in clinical work. And then we'd move on to reflection. And so the reflection section is something that I brought in maybe later on in my role as an assistant psychologist, as I became more comfortable in like what reflection was and how to bring it up and just how to do it, really. And that's okay, like you don't have to know how to do all of these things right at the beginning of your AP post, it's fine. Things that I would bring in were things that were happening in the world. So I remember we spent a lot of time reflecting on George Floyd and how that impacted our work and my work in particular, and me as a clinician. And so thinking about how the outside world impacts our work is really important and a very valid form of reflection. I would also bring in research articles. That's something that I quite enjoyed. So I would send a research article to my supervisor and be like, hi, could we discuss this in supervision? And then I would read it through a critical lens, and then we discuss it in supervision. And when I say through a critical lens, I mean just querying its validity, its reliability, thinking about the clinical applications and things like that. Now this one can be quite dependent on how much time your supervisor has, and so I found that when my supervisor had a really full-on week, we wouldn't do this. And to be honest, we only did this a handful of times, but it is a very useful way to use space and supervision to aid your learning. Another way that I used this space for reflection was to reflect on important themes that were coming up in my work. So towards the end of my AP role, we spoke a lot about endings, and so I thought, you know what, I kind of want to bring this to supervision and figure out like, what does a good ending look like? How do we know when someone is ready to end their work with us, and how do we navigate this, and how do we make sure they have the best outcome possible when they leave this space and this therapeutic relationship? And so I found that so helpful, and again, this is something that I really developed towards the end of my assistant psychologist role, and I wish I kind of spent more time thinking about this, but then again, I don't think I was as developed in that way, so maybe that's why. But my point is that I don't want anyone to come away from this video and be like, oh my gosh, I need to add all of these things to my supervision. But I think it definitely comes with time, and it definitely comes with the development of your relationship with your supervisor. And then we'd come to any other business, and that could literally be about anything. And so it could be stuff like related to IT, related to like room bookings, or just anything else. Obviously this agenda is made collaboratively with my supervisor, so we'd come up with this agenda like right at the beginning, and then she would also say, okay, like, can we put this on? Oh, I've got this thing that I want to talk to you about, like a good project that might be interesting for you. I know that towards my Declan Psy interview, we spoke quite a bit about that and how I felt about it. And then actually towards the end of my post, we spoke about like how I felt about starting training. And that was so important to me because I've spoken about this before, but the feelings of inferiority and imposter syndrome were very much real, and my supervisor did a great job in handling all of those emotions. And also reflecting on like personal things as well. So if there was anything going on in my personal life, like what support I need at the time and how we can, you know, make work a little bit easier. So yeah, that's kind of what my supervision looked like as an AP. I probably will carry this template into my work as a trainee because I found it really helpful. I'm used to working this way, but again, this will change with who I'm being supervised by. Some people are more fluid, some people are more, you know, structured and go through it in a more systematic fashion like we've done here. But that doesn't mean it's the right way to do it, it's just the way that I work best. And now moving on to how to make the most out of your supervision. So I think the main thing is to plan. Never go into supervision without a list of questions, without a list of cases. You need to be prepared. You don't want to waste their time and your time. So I would, like I said, I have this template and I would think about, okay, what cases do I need to bring up today? I would literally write down the initials and dates of birth and ages of all of my clients so I don't forget about anyone. I'd write a few points about where we're at, what we're going to do, any challenges, things that I wanted to discuss. I'd write down a couple of points on the topics for reflection, any other business, all of that, and I'd kind of write this list throughout the week so that I wasn't rushing to bring all of these ideas together. I also think it's really important to use your own initiative, and so what I mean by that is, yes, doing your planning, but also asking to observe your supervisor, asking all of the questions. No question is silly. It's actually more silly for you to not ask a question and then just be guessing for the whole time, so ask all of the questions, and also ask for opportunities. If you feel like you are twiddling your thumbs a little bit, then ask for more work, ask for more challenging work, express your interest in a certain area, like maybe it's leadership or group work, and ask how you can be more involved with that, or service development, and they should be able to accommodate you in some way. But the main thing is that you need to be the motivator for your learning. They can't guess what you need to be quite vocal about it. I also think it's really important to reflect on supervision. When you come out of supervision, think about, okay, was that a helpful supervision or a not so helpful supervision? If so, then why was it that way? Why have I come out feeling this way? And also think about, in the next supervision, what you'd like to spend more time on. So if you felt like you spent the whole of your supervision just talking about the practicalities of how many clients you're going to see, when you're going to discharge them, like not much clinical reflection, then maybe bring it up with your supervisor and say, hey, like I'd like to spend more time reflecting on my work and how I can improve and how I can grow as a clinician, rather than the, you know, more admin-y bits and logistics. So definitely spend some time reflecting on supervision, which seems quite strange because then you're kind of like doing this inception thing of reflecting on reflecting, but it's still really important because then you can make the most out of it. Now, how can you figure out if you're getting good supervision? So I think good supervision means that you come out of it feeling very contained and feeling as though you have a plan. I also think that supervision is a place where you can be open with your supervisor, and I think this mainly comes down to the relationship that you have with them. And so it can be quite tricky if you don't have the best relationship with your supervisor, but having a supervisory relationship where it's very trusting and you can be honest, I think is what makes really good supervision. I also think good supervision should be the catalyst for your professional development, and so I feel like as an AP you shouldn't really feel stagnant in your work. You should be challenged, and I think you should be on this journey of growth and progression on a weekly basis, and as a psychologist I think this does continue, and I think it should continue. So as an AP I think it's really important that you come out with supervision not feeling bored but challenged in a way that is helpful. So not feeling challenged in the way that you can't do it, but able to feel capable about these challenges. Okay, on to the nitty-gritty though. What if supervision isn't working for you, or dare I say it, what if you think your supervision is bad or unhelpful? Typically, when supervision isn't working for people, it is mainly to do with the supervisory relationship. Maybe you're not given enough time, or maybe it's just not being used appropriately. And that can be really tricky. The first port of call would be to have a conversation with your supervisor, and that can be really awkward. I've never had a situation like this, but I have heard from other APs who have had terrible experiences in supervision, and they've had to have that conversation with their supervisor where they've had to, you know, reflect back to them and say, look, I don't think I'm getting the most out of this. I feel like there might be some, you know, tension between us and I'm not too sure why, and whether we can maybe work on this, or whether it might be more appropriate for me to be supervised by someone else. We're used to having difficult conversations, but maybe not so much with our colleagues, and definitely not with our senior members of staff. If you don't feel like you're able to do that with them, then I think that's also maybe indicative of a bigger issue potentially in the relationship, where you feel like there's such a great power imbalance that you can't be honest with them about the fact that you're not getting the support that you need. And remember that you are entitled to this support. It's not only unsafe for you, but it's unsafe for the client. So keep your clients in mind if you are having unhelpful supervision. If you aren't able to bring it up in supervision, then go to someone higher up. So that might be your head of service, or maybe just another senior member of the psychology staff who you trust, and escalate it that way. Yes, it will be awkward. No, we don't really like conflict, but you have to do it in order to keep your client safe and in order to ensure your professional growth. I don't want to, you know, keep going on about all the negatives, but supervision is so important and it's so valuable when it's done right. and no one should miss out on that opportunity. Now remember, in order to progress in your career, even if you're in different roles, you need to have this ability to reflect, and this skill will primarily come from supervision, because you'll be observing your supervisor reflecting, and that's a really good opportunity for you to model their behaviour and how they actually reflect. But like I said, I think this is something that definitely grows over time. As you become more comfortable with your supervisor, you will be able to reflect on more things, you'll be able to be more vulnerable, you'll be able to bring your personal self into the room. So don't put any pressure on yourself and think, okay, this is how someone else's supervision is looking like, and I need to match that. It won't work, because your relationship is going to be very different from the relationship that I had with my supervisors, and so just bear that in mind. But I'm really curious to know how everyone else structures their supervision, whether you go for this more, you know, systematic approach, or whether you are more fluid and just go with the flow and have a conversation about work. But yeah, please give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe for more content like this. And until next time guys, I will see you later. Bye.